with Final Fantasy VII Remake, there was a big suggestion from the game, and a belief from a lot of the players, that this project was focused on doing things differently. But then, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth came along, and after Rebirth, there seemed to be a large number of people who feel like that premise was abandoned, and that this is clearly just going to proceed how the OG proceeded going forwards. So today, I want to talk briefly about whether or not that's true. Also, I've finished Expedition 33 at long last, so expect a video coming soon discussing the game, but not only that, discussing how it does have some parallels with Final Fantasy VII Remake's narrative, potentially. Depends if I'm right or not about one of the things I think, but yeah, it does possibly tie in a little bit, so we're going to talk about that in the future, but we're not going to dive into any Expedition 33 talk in this video. We'll keep that for a future video, no spoilers for Expedition 33, but obviously we're going to be talking about the whole Final Fantasy VII compilation, so, you know, spoilers. But yeah, back to the topic. Today we're discussing whether or not the devs bottled it, essentially. Did the negative feedback from some people about the heavy changes and the heavy suggestions of future changes in Final Fantasy VII Remake cause the devs to course correct a little bit? Or was this the plan all along? Is everything going according to plan? And have they actually really given up on the prospect of changes? Spoilers, I don't think they have. So yeah, welcome back to Set 6, like the video, subscribe for future content, but let's dive into this. So like I was saying, Remake definitely set up the prospect of Destiny and Fate being changed. That the way things panned out in the OG was not necessarily the best result, and whether or not that's true, that was the suggestion. Throughout Final Fantasy VII Remake we encounter the Whispers, or the Arbiters of Fate as Red 13 tells us later on in the game. Now they pop up repeatedly when the course of events diverges from the original Final Fantasy VII, with the intent of correcting things, whether that's immediately or eventually. And throughout Final Fantasy VII Remake, they are presented to us as a foe, a barrier to be overcome. And this all comes to fruition in the final chapter of Remake, where Sephiroth, who is 100% interested in changing things given the way that he is behaving in Remake, goads the party into taking Fate and Destiny into their own hands, which puts us in a direct conflict with the Whisper Harbinger. Now the Whisper Harbinger is an amalgamation of all the Whispers essentially. It's a final barrier that we have to overcome. It's the final thing that is protecting the course of, well, history from our perspective. To make it even more obvious what's going on, we fight against embodiments of people from that continuity in the three Whisper bosses. Crokeo, Rubrum and Viride all resemble Yuzu, Kadaj and Loz respectively. So again, not only is the Whisper Harbinger trying to protect this series of events, but it's even manifesting things that exist in that course of events in order to defend Fate and Destiny. So yeah, it's pretty on the nose. And throughout the whole fight, we're seeing flashes of the events of that continuity, which is the future for these characters, and at the end of it, once we've broken Fate and Destiny and defeated the Whisper Harbinger, we see Sephiroth absorb a massive amount of energy, seemingly the events of Meteor Fall, which is another future event. So the Whispers are clearly a big focal point in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and they remain a focal point in Rebirth, but in a different manner. But in Remake it is very much all about Fate and Destiny, protecting the course of events, the course of history, protecting the way things are meant to be. And not only do we fight against them, we defeat them. So that's a huge suggestion there that everything's open. You know, Fate and Destiny's been defeated, things can just go how they go at this point. Now, after we've defeated the Whisper Harbinger, another thing happens. A thing that happens throughout Remake that suggests that things are a bit different. And the thing that happens is Sephiroth. So he's absorbed all this energy, we fight against him, and all the way through Final Fantasy VII Remake, Sephiroth's actions are entirely different from the OG. I mean, obviously, given that we don't even see him in Midgar in the OG. But here he is, front and centre, almost immediately. almost immediately. He pops up a little bit in Chapter 1, but just his voice and a feather. And then in Chapter 2, bam, how's it going, Cloud? Nice to see you. Now, this does make sense. The devs have already explained this in a way, and they've said that the Sephiroth cat is out of the bag, and has been for a very long time, so it's pointless them trying to build suspense like they do in the OG for a character that we already know all too well. And I get that completely. But that doesn't mean there isn't a narrative reason for it as well. Obviously, that's the real world reason why Sephiroth is kind of front and center, but there kind of has to be a narrative reason for it. It'd be disappointing if there wasn't a narrative reason for it. So, what is that narrative reason? We also get this whole vibe from Sephiroth that he knows what's coming in the future. You know what I mean? He's goading the party throughout the game with these suggestions that things could be different. He's constantly getting at Cloud. The scene from the Edge of Creation at the end of Remake suggests enough. You know, you look at it in retrospect after playing Rebirth, and he's talking about their world joining another. That is pretty much what he's talking about. And we'll get to that in a minute. You know, we'll get to that. We'll get to the whole world thing in a minute. But why would that be the case if things are going to be the same? So yeah, all of this in Remake gave us the feeling that things could go differently going forwards, and that for a lot of these new aspects to pay off, it almost has to go differently. There is this argument that all of this new stuff is just expansion, but I personally disagree with that. There is a lot of expansion in the project, don't get me wrong, both Remake and Rebirth, but there are also distinct things that feel more like different stuff, changes, that stand out as something more than a little bit of expansion here and there. Now, the Whisper's existence definitely fits into that category, and Sephiroth's behaviour definitely fits into that category. So, yeah, for people that are thinking along those lines, changes were expected. But also, a lot of people were furious at the potential for change and the changes that had already happened in Remake, claiming that they were done with the project and being very vocal about it online. The community was pretty divided on the subject, and it does remain so to this day in a lot of ways. I expect comments both sides of the divide on this video, you know. Not everyone can agree on this, and I wouldn't expect everyone to agree on it. It is a bit contentious. But then Rebirth came along, and a lot of people seemingly feel like Rebirth was the nail in the coffin of this is going to be different, and that premise has been abandoned. Whether they believe the devs bottled it after a lot of people were kicking off and were negative about the path that Remake was taking, or whether this was the plan all along, people viewed it as, oh, well that's that then. There was barely anything different about Rebirth. But I would personally beg to differ. In my mind, there were still a decent amount of changes, things beyond expansion that occurred in Rebirth. Now, I do feel like there was a lot more expansion this time around compared to Remake, just purely for the fact that we cover a lot more ground in Rebirth, both literally and narratively. And I think one factor that has led people to seeing the changes less is the volume of tweaking and expanding that we did see in Rebirth. This could potentially have led to the feeling that less changed proportionally than it did in Remake, which then overall made people feel like the changes could have been abandoned. But outside of things that were expansion, like the Republic of Junon stuff, and the changes and tweaks to the whole Junon region to accommodate this, there were definite narrative changes that are beyond expansion. And at the centre of all of them is Hot Boy Sephiroth. The whole Wu-Tai thing is probably the earliest example that we get, with a war seemingly on the brink of starting up, pushed by Rufus and our good friend Glenn Lodbrok. And this is a story that carries on throughout the game, but by the end of the game, we find out that this is Sephiroth, pulling strings and making things go the way he wants them to go. Now, we obviously don't have the whole story behind what happened with Sephiroth and Glenn and how we ended up at this point. If you want to catch up on that whole story up to where we're up to, go and check out the playlist on the channel where I've got breakdowns for every chapter of The First Soldier, both episode 1 and episode 2, and you can catch up on the whole story there. Go check it out. But yeah, one of the biggest narrative changes outside of the party and what they're trying to do is 100% being controlled by Sephiroth. So that's interesting. Another new thing that we have is the baby weapons, proto-weapons, teeny tiny weapon, whatever they are, they're new, and they impact the narrative in a big way in the Gongaga section of Rebirth, and they have a lot of potential for things that could happen going forwards. And who is it that pops up sticking his sword in and trying to accomplish something? Sephiroth. And the devs make a point to show us that this interaction could mean something, because they show us those two weapons at the end of the game, and they prominently show the scar that Sephiroth has left on one of these weapons, and these weapons themselves are new. You know what I mean? These are completely new. So we don't know what's going on here. The weapons shouldn't even be awake at this point. So what's going on with these boys? But that's another thing. That's a different subject. Let's get back to Sephiroth being a bit weird. We also see him poking and prodding Cloud constantly throughout the game, which isn't a massive difference to the OG, because he does that a lot in the OG in these stages of the game, but it is at a more intense rate. And it's not like in the OG, he's like, who are you? When we first see him on the Junon Ferry. We're way beyond that stage. Way beyond that stage. So Sephiroth is much deeper into Cloud. So that's sort of a difference. You could also maybe argue that that's expansion. I'll let you have that one as potentially expansion. But the really big differences come after the Temple of the Ancients. There are a few things that are a little bit different in the Temple of the Ancients. The conversation between Aerith and Sephiroth 100% is something that I would view as a difference. But outside of that, I'd say the bulk of the things that we get in the Temple of the Ancients is just expansion. The Gi stuff's a little bit different. I would argue that that's probably expansion, but maybe a little bit of a change. You know, the whole Gi creating the black materia thing. I think it's going to impact the main narrative a little bit, but not massively. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see on that one. I'm 50-50 on the Gi, which it is, you know, whether it's a change or an expansion. We'll see. But yeah, other than that, we could say that pretty much everything that happens in the temple, the trials, things like that, it's all expansion. But one thing that is certainly a change comes after it, and that is Sephiroth showing Cloud the nature of the worlds, explaining it to him, you know, giving him a little tour, showing him a few alternate realities, that sort of thing. And I would not just call that a small change either. I would say that this is a pretty substantial change. Especially when you consider the fact that this whole system of worlds could be a core part of the narrative of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you know, the whole project. You know, an integral part of it could be the worlds that have been created and why they've been created and who they've been created by. So this is pretty meaty. And then straight after that, we get another massive change, which is kind of a change and not a change at the same time, because it's the one where Cloud, you know, that guy, Cloud, main character, that one, he saves and doesn't save Aerith at the end of the game. He tries to save her, he does save her, but then there's a little flicker and he doesn't save her. And he finishes off the game with a weird broken perspective and grasp on reality, still seeing the supposedly dead Aerith, you know, merging the black materia into his sword, seeing a massive tear in the sky, and then heading off onto the tiny Bronco, heading north. And I know what you're thinking, the biggest change in that list is having the tiny Bronco, right? Right? But yeah, in all seriousness, that's a pretty substantial list of differences to the OG. Let's be completely honest. Now, the black materia merging into the sword, we could argue that that's expansion, but I don't know, I feel like it plays into Cloud's severely altered mental state at that point, which is a huge difference in my mind. So yeah, I'm kind of 50-50 on the black materia, but these changes leave things wide open still for substantial changes to still happen going forwards into Remake Part 3. It is still on, in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying Aerith is alive or anything like that. I'm not saying Aerith is definitely dead. She is Schrodinger's Aerith at this point. She is both. And I don't know who needs to make the observation, because it sure as shit ain't Cloud. But what I am saying is that they have specifically shown us in the final chapter of Rebirth that something has happened. Something different has gone down. Sephiroth is thrilled with how things have gone. Once again, he got to harvest up his power, he got to mess with Cloud, he got to take Aerith out as far as he's concerned, so he's very happy. Now, he wasn't very happy about getting slapped around in like the Edge of Creation space after he underestimated Aerith, but overall, he still flies off with a smile on his face. Things seem to be going well for him, and Aerith and Cloud discuss that in the game. And yeah, obviously, given that he would want to change things from the original continuity where he gets defeated over and over and over again by Cloud, this seems to suggest that he thinks that the changes that he's made so far are steps in the right direction. But that bit's just speculation on my part. I just feel like it's pretty solidly backed up by the events in game. Oh, you know what as well? We did leave someone out entirely. Someone who's a pretty substantial change from the OG. Yeah, you guessed it, Zack. At the end of Remake, we see a world where Zack survives his last stand against Shinra, and then in Rebirth, we see him get Cloud back to Midgar, save an unconscious version of Aerith from Shinra, build a loving relationship with Elmira. And then he splits himself in three pretty much by making some choices, seemingly dying twice and then travelling through worlds, meeting Cloud, fighting Sephiroth a bit, and then getting expelled to another version of the church in a different world. So, you know, nothing too major there, right? Right? No, this is again a pretty substantial series of changes that could heavily impact the main narrative, and I mean, I suppose you could try to handwave it off as expansion, but I'm not feeling it. And the worlds themselves, also interesting, especially with the numbering of the stamps suggesting that we've seen 5 of 7 worlds, with only worlds 1 and 2 having not been seen. So what if the Edge of Creation is the 2-star world, and you know, those 2 massive nebulas represent the stars that we see on stamp, and is the launching off point for everything that Sephiroth has tried to do. Which I suppose then makes the OG world the 1-star world, or maybe the OG is above this numbering system. I have no idea what I'm talking about right now, but do you see the possibilities that can come from what they've put in front of us so far? Those possibilities only come from the fact there are substantial differences that feel way beyond the expansion when it comes to these worlds, just like Aerith's fate, Cloud's broken perception, Sephiroth's machinations, Zack's survival, and it is interesting that when you look at it like that, you have the 4 main focus characters of Final Fantasy VII's overall narrative being involved in massive changes during the remake project, while the other massive change is a system of worlds that exist within the livestream where different fates can play out. It makes you think that these worlds are the manifestation of someone's desire for things to be different. Almost certainly Sephiroth, you know, almost certainly Sephiroth, considering he got whooped. But then you've got Aerith reacting against him, as she does in Livestream Black and White, while Zack and Cloud are just kind of caught in the middle of everything, which seems to be where they keep ending up. You know, if we look at the overall Final Fantasy VII compilation. So let's circle back to the question, did they bottle it and abandon the changes they laid out in Remake? And I would say no. I'd say if anything, they went even further, especially in the latter stages of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And this for me still leaves me with the belief that things could pan out very differently going forwards into Part 3. Now, for a long time I've been saying the North Crater feels like a breaking point where things could go wild, but I also wouldn't be surprised if we get pretty much to the end of Final Fantasy VII's original narrative, almost beat for beat, with a lot of things still going on, but then the big difference, the big divergence comes after the ending. Do you know what I mean? Maybe we finish the OG, Meteor Fall happens, maybe we defeat it the same as we do in the OG, but then more happens after that. Something else that then gives us the context for what's been going on. I wouldn't rule that out at all. But yeah, that's where I'm at with the whole thing at the minute. I have felt a strong urge for the last few days to talk about this after some of the discourse that I've seen lately online. There's possibly more I could dive into, but I think I've covered the main points. And yeah, not had much time to get this together, and I've not done a video for a while, so I figured I'd just squeeze what I can in. Babies keep you real busy. I'm just going to warn you now, busy. Very busy. But yeah, that's my general thoughts on the subject. What about you? Do you think the devs back down? Do you think that we'll see changes still in Part 3? And how far-reaching do you think those changes will be? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? Leave it in the comments below. Please do like the video and subscribe for future content, but more importantly than all of that, have a great day.